Welcome to lecture 9 of Python module, and in this video we will talk about exception handling. So let's first understand what are exceptions. An exception is an unexpected event that occurs during program execution, that means at runtime. For example, here we have a variable divide by 0 and we have assigned a value 7 divided by 0 to it. So it's not possible to divide a number by 0. Therefore, the above code causes an exception. Now, any logical error is termed as exception in Python. So these errors occur at runtime, that means after passing the syntax test. So few of the examples of Python exceptions are file not found error. We get this error when we try to open a file that does not exist. Or zero division error. We get this when we try to divide a number by 0. Then we sometimes see import error. So this occurs when we try to import a module that does not exist. And few of the most common error is the index error and runtime error. Index error is raised when the index of a sequence is out of range, and runtime error is raised when the error does not fall under any other category. So whenever these type of runtime error occur, Python creates an exception object. So if that object is not handled properly, it prints a traceback to that error along with some detail about why that error occurred. For example, in this case, we have created a variable divide number and assigned a value 7 divided by 0, and then finally we are printing this variable. In the output, when we are running this code, we are getting an error traceback. In line number 1, we are getting zero division error. That means we are trying to divide a number by 0, which is not possible. In Python, we have built-in exceptions, and we can view all the built-in exceptions using a built-in local function. How to call this function? You just need to write local parenthesis and inside square bracket you need to write the name of that file inside which all the built-in exceptions are declared, and then we are writing dir which allow us to list these attribute as string. So few of the examples which we saw earlier, like file not found, index error, exception error, these are all the inbuilt Python exception. We can handle these built-in and user-defined exceptions in Python using try, except, and finally statements. What are they, when to use, and what are their functionality, we will be seeing in a while. So as you can see in the diagram as well, if our code passes the syntax test, but at the runtime we are getting an error, those errors are termed as exceptions. Now let's see Python try and except block. So this block is used to handle exceptions in Python. So inside the try block, we write a code that may cause an exception. And inside the except block, we run a code when the exception occurs. So for example, we have written a code inside try that raises an exception. Therefore, the code or the run will go into the except block and the code inside the except block will get executed. Every try block is followed by an except block, and the except block cannot be used without the try block. For example, if condition can have only one else, but for using else, there is important to have if condition. So that's the relation between try and except as well. Now let's see an example of exception handling using try and except. Now in this example, you can see that inside the try block, we have declared two variables, numerator and denominator, and also we have given values to them. In numerator, we are assigning 10 and in denominator, we are giving it as 0. Then we have created a new variable result that will be printing numerator divided by denominator, and then we are finally printing that result. Now we have also written an except block inside which we have a print statement that says that error denominator cannot be 0. Now when I'm trying to run this code, you can see that since my denominator is 0, the try block will raise an exception. Therefore, the block inside except will be executed. Therefore, the output will be a print statement that is error denominator cannot be a 0. Now let's see how to catch specific exceptions in Python. To do that, we use multiple except block that allow us to handle each exception differently, and the argument type of each except block indicate the type of exception that can be handled by it. For example, in this case, we have a try block that has a list of even numbers, and then I'm trying to print the fifth index of even number. Since the indexing starts from 0 and the total I have 4 element, the last index is only 3. So 5 is actually out of index. Therefore, it will raise us an index error. Therefore, after the try block, since it raises an error, it goes inside the except block. Now I have two except block. One for when we raise a zero division error, and one is to handle the index error. Since in this case we get the index error, the except for the index error will be executed. Therefore, in the output, we will get a print statement inside the index error except block. So the final output will be the index out of bound. Now let's see how to use try with else clause. So we use else clause when we want to run a certain block of code if the code block inside try runs without any error. So for this we will be using optional else keyword with the try statement. For example, we need to print the reciprocal of an even number. So what I have to do, first I need to check whether the number given by user is even or not. For that I will be using the try and except block, and if it's even number, I want certain code to get executed which will return me a reciprocal of even number. So those line I will write inside the else block. So basically the else block is executed if no exception is occurred, and the try block is executed without any error. So let's see the lines of code. So inside try block, I have created a variable num which will be taking the input from a user and convert that string into the int. Now I will be checking whether a number is divisible by 2 or not. So using this assert keyword, basically it helps me test if a condition in your code returns true. And if it returns me false, the program will raise an assertion error. Therefore, if it's an even number, it returns me true and the else block is executed where a reciprocal variable stores 1 divided by number and it gets printed. But if this assert condition returns me false, an assertion error is created and the except block is executed which returns me not an even number. For example, if we pass an odd number, for example 1, so assert will return me false, therefore the except block will be executed which returns me not an even number. But if we pass an even number, for example 4, the assert condition is true, therefore the else block will get executed and the reciprocal of 4, which is 0.25, will be returned as the output. So that's an example of a try with else clause. Now let's see the try with finally block. The finally block is always executed no matter whether there's an exception or not, and the finally block is optional. And for every try block, there can only be one finally block. We have already seen that we can have more than one except block which handle unique exceptions differently, but finally block can be only one for one try block, and finally block will always executed no matter whether we have an exception or we don't have. For example, here we have a numerator and denominator inside try block, and then it's finally printing the result, that is numerator divided by denominator. So if the denominator is 0, we get a 0 error exception. So the except block should be printed, which will return the error denominator cannot be 0. And whatever I'm writing inside the finally block, it will be always executed. For example, this is a finally block. So when I'm running this, since my denominator is 0, that is what I have declared, an except block and finally block will be executed and our output will be error denominator cannot be 0, and this is a finally block. The exception is caught by the except block and then the finally block is executed. So that's all about try, else, except and finally block. Let's have a small recap about it. So basically when we are running a code inside try block, if we get an exception, an except block is executed. If we don't get an exception, an else block is also executed, and finally is always executed irrespective of whether we get an exception or we don't get an exception. So that's all in this video. Thank you.